I didn't notice anything was wrong at first. I was just sitting there waiting, doing what people do when they believe they're alone in their thoughts. And then someone sat down beside me. Not next to me. Close enough that my body reacted before my mind did. That's when I realized some moments don't announce themselves as danger. They arrive politely. There are places you don't remember arriving at. You only remember realizing you are already there. That's how the bench felt that night. I don't remember choosing it. I don't remember scanning the platform or weighing my options. One moment I was walking, the next I was sitting, hands folded loosely in my lap, knees angled slightly inward the way I always do when I don't want to take up space. The station was quiet in the way public places become quiet after a certain hour. Not silent, but hollowed out. Sounds didn't disappear. They echoed longer than they should have. A cough at the far end of the platform lingered. Footsteps sounded more deliberate than they probably were. Even the electric hum of the lights felt like it was thinking before it spoke. I sat beneath one of those lights. It buzzed faintly above me, steady but tired, casting a pale wash over the concrete. The bench was metal, cold even through my clothes, its surface dotted with small scratches that caught the light and released it again. I remember noticing the space beside me. Not because someone was there, because no one was. The rest of the bench stretched out, empty, like an unspoken invitation. Plenty of room. More than enough. The kind of space that makes you relax your shoulders without realizing you were holding them up. I checked my phone. No notifications. No messages. The time glowed brighter than it needed to. I turned the screen off and listened. Somewhere above the platform, a train passed without stopping. The sound rolled through the station like distant weather. Wind followed it, stirring dust, lifting a scrap of paper that dragged itself along the ground with a faint, patient sound. I remember thinking, this is fine. That thought came fully formed, like it had been waiting. Then someone sat down. Not beside me. Too close. There's a difference you feel before you understand. Metal shifted. The bench gave a small, shared creak, the kind that tells you weight has been added. I knew immediately that the space beside me, the generous, obvious space, had not been used. Instead, there was warmth. Not touching. Not exactly. But near enough that my arm reacted before my mind did. Muscles tightened. Skin noticed. I didn't look right away. That part matters. I stared straight ahead at the tracks, at the dull shine of steel disappearing into darkness, and tried to calculate the situation without moving my head. There was still room on the bench. I could tell that without seeing it. I could feel the unused space beyond him, the way air behaves differently when it isn't occupied, which meant the closeness was a choice. I breathed in through my nose. Slow. Quiet. The way you do when you don't want anyone to know you're reacting. I told myself the first lie of the night. Maybe he didn't notice. The bench wasn't narrow. The station wasn't crowded. There was no reason for him to sit that close. But the lie slid into place easily, like something I'd practiced. I adjusted my posture slightly, shifting my weight, creating what I hoped was a subtle cue. The kind of movement that says there's space. You can take it. He didn't move. I could feel him now, not his body exactly, but the shape of his presence. Heat through fabric. The faint brush of air displaced when he breathed. The rhythm of it, slow and unhurried. Still, I didn't look. There's a strange rule people follow in public discomfort. If you don't acknowledge it, it might not become real. If you keep your eyes forward, your face neutral, your body compliant, the moment might pass on its own. So I stayed still. Seconds stretched. Or minutes. Time does something slippery when you're waiting for something to change. I noticed details instead. The sound of his breathing, even, unremarkable, not heavy, not strained. The faint smell of fabric warmed by a body. Laundry detergent, maybe. Or nothing at all. Sometimes the absence of a smell is more noticeable than its presence. My arm was close enough now that if I moved it, even slightly, we would touch. I wondered if he was aware of that. I wondered if I was the only one measuring the distance. Another lie surfaced, quieter this time. It would be rude to move. The thought arrived with a familiar weight. Social gravity. The invisible pull that keeps people in uncomfortable situations longer than they should be. I imagined standing up, stepping away, choosing another bench. The image felt disproportionate, like an overreaction. Like something that would draw attention. Like something that would require explanation, even if no one asked. I stayed. The station clock clicked forward. The sound was sharp in the quiet, each second announced with unnecessary confidence. I could feel the stranger's leg now, not touching mine, just close enough that the heat crossed the gap, just close enough that the space between us felt occupied. I wondered what he was looking at. I wondered if he was looking at me. The urge to turn my head grew stronger, pressing against my restraint. Curiosity tangled with caution. Part of me wanted information. Any detail that could justify or dismiss the feeling crawling along my spine. Another part of me didn't want to confirm anything. Because once you look, you can't unknow what you see. A train announcement crackled overhead. Static first, then a voice, flat and distant, listing times and destinations that no longer felt connected to me. The stranger shifted slightly. Not away. Closer. It was subtle, so small it could have been accidental. But the result was undeniable. The space shrank. My breath caught, just a little. I exhaled slowly, hoping the sound was lost in the ambient noise. I told myself the third lie. If it was intentional, it would be obvious. But that's not how intention always works. Sometimes it hides in plausibility, in movements that can be explained away, in choices that sit just inside the boundary of normal. That's where discomfort lives, in the places you can't point to without sounding unreasonable. I finally turned my head, not all the way, just enough to register shape and color from the corner of my eye. He was older than me, or maybe just tired. His posture was relaxed, shoulders slightly rounded, hands resting loosely in his lap. He wasn't leaning toward me. He wasn't staring. That almost made it worse, because nothing about him demanded alarm, which meant the feeling had nowhere to go. I faced forward again, heart tapping lightly against my ribs, as if testing the space. I thought about all the times I'd ignored small instincts because they didn't come with proof. All the times I'd waited for permission to feel uncomfortable. The bench creaked again as he adjusted his weight. Our sleeves brushed. Just fabric. Just a moment. My body reacted before my thoughts caught up. A flicker of heat, a tightening low in my stomach, a sharp awareness of my own boundaries. Still, I didn't move. Somewhere behind us, footsteps approached and passed. Someone else existed briefly in our shared space, then moved on, leaving the air slightly disturbed. I wished they had stayed. The train was late. I checked my phone again, the glow a small shield. I pretended to read something, anything, just to give my eyes somewhere to rest. I could feel him beside me, patient. I wondered how long he'd been watching before he sat down. That thought slipped in uninvited, fully formed, and refused to leave. I tried to reason with myself. You're tired that you're overthinking. Nothing has happened. All true. And yet, the bench felt smaller now. The light above us harsher. The open space of the station suddenly too exposed, like a room without doors. I became acutely aware of my options. Stand up, stay, say something that do nothing. Each choice carried weight. Each choice required energy I wasn't sure I had. The stranger's presence remained steady, unchanging, like he had all the time in the world. I wondered if he could feel my hesitation. I wondered if that was the point. The announcement crackled again. A train approaching. Not mine. The sound swelled, then receded, leaving the station just as it was before, quiet, waiting. I stayed seated. I stayed aware. And somewhere in the space between us, something unspoken settled in, heavy and unfinished. The hardest part wasn't that he stayed. It was that nothing changed. Time moved forward in small, measurable ways. The clock clicked, the lights hummed, announcements came and went, but the space between us remained exactly as it was. Close enough to be felt, not close enough to justify alarm. I became aware of my own stillness, how carefully I was holding myself. Shoulders steady, back straight but not rigid. My hands folded, then unfolded, then folded again. Each movement was calculated, softened, made to look natural. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. Not my face, I still hadn't turned fully toward him, but my posture. The way I occupied my half of the bench. The way my body made itself smaller without instruction. That awareness brought a strange heat to my cheeks. Not embarrassment, something closer to recognition. I knew this version of myself. The one who waits. The one who gathers information quietly, hoping clarity will arrive on its own. The bench creaked again. This time, I felt it travel through the metal into my legs. A shared vibration. He shifted his foot, angled his knee slightly inward. Closer. Still not touching. I swallowed. There it was again, the invisible line being approached but never crossed. The place where intention hides behind deniability. I thought about saying something simple. Excuse me. Just that. Neutral. Polite. A sound more than a statement. I rehearsed it in my head, shaping the word, testing how it might land. I imagined his response. Apology. Surprise. He hadn't realized. Of course. He would move. The story played out cleanly in my mind, but my mouth didn't open. Instead, I waited for the train. Waiting became its own activity. My senses sharpened around it. Every distant sound felt like a promise. Every vibration in the rails made my heart lift, then sink. The stranger's breathing remained steady. I tried not to sync mine with his. I tried not to imagine what his life looked like beyond this bench. Where he'd come from, where he was going, whether this closeness meant anything at all to him. Because if it didn't, if this was accidental, meaningless, then my reaction felt too large, unjustified, excessive, and that somehow felt worse. A memory surfaced then, uninvited. Another bench, another place. Another time I'd stayed seated longer than I wanted to because leaving felt impolite. I'd learned early that discomfort doesn't always announce itself clearly. Sometimes it arrives dressed as doubt. Sometimes it borrows the language of reason. Don't make a scene, that don't assume the worst, that don't embarrass anyone, including yourself. The station doors opened briefly somewhere behind us. Cold air slipped in, brushing my neck, then disappeared again as the doors closed. The stranger shifted his weight once more. This time, our arms touched. Not skin, fabric against fabric. A fleeting contact that could have been dismissed by anyone not paying attention. But I was paying attention. My body reacted instantly. A jolt, sharp and unmistakable, like static. My arm pulled inward before I could stop it, elbow tucking closer to my side. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge it at all. He simply remained. That was when the thought settled fully into place, heavy and certain. He knows. Not necessarily that I was uncomfortable, but that I was aware. That there was a boundary here, thin and trembling, and that he was close enough to feel it. I stared at the tracks again, at the darkness pooled between the rails. My reflection flickered faintly in the glass of the opposite platform, blurred, incomplete. I wondered what it would look like if someone else were watching us. Two strangers on a bench, sitting, waiting, nothing remarkable. The danger of quiet moments is how easily they disappear from the outside. Inside, though, everything felt amplified. I became acutely aware of my heartbeat, the way it sped up when he shifted, the way it slowed when nothing happened, the exhausting vigilance of waiting for a next move that might never come. I told myself another lie. If he wanted something, he would have done something by now. But wanting doesn't always rush. Sometimes it lingers. Sometimes it watches. Another announcement crackled overhead. My train would arrive soon. The words delayed and shortly floated through the air, vague and unsatisfying. Soon could mean anything. The stranger leaned back slightly, stretching his legs out in front of him. For a moment, the pressure eased. The space between us breathed. Relief washed through me, surprising in its intensity. I hated that. Hated how quickly my body accepted the smallest concession as mercy. I relaxed just a fraction, shoulders dropping, breath loosening. That was when he leaned forward again. Not suddenly, not sharply, just enough to reclaim the closeness. The rhythm of it felt deliberate now. Advance, retreat, advance again, like testing water temperature. I wondered if he could hear my heart. I wondered if he counted my breaths the way I counted his. My phone buzzed in my hand, a notification I hadn't felt arrive. The vibration startled me, a sharp interruption that sent my pulse racing. I welcomed it. I welcomed anything that broke the pattern. I glanced down at the screen, though I didn't read the message. The light illuminated my hands, my knees, the edge of his sleeve. For the first time, I really saw him. Not his face, not fully, but details. The fabric of his jacket, worn at the cuff. The way his hands rested, fingers relaxed, nails trimmed short. Ordinary hands. That ordinariness pressed in on me. There was no villain here. No clear threat. Just a man sitting too close, in a way that made my body tense and my mind spiral. I imagined explaining it later. He didn't do anything. That IT was just a feeling that I don't know why it bothered me so much. I imagined the nods, the half smiles, the subtle implication that I'd read too much into it. That imagined response weighed on me more than his presence. The train lights appeared at the far end of the tunnel then, distant and pale. A promise at last. My breath caught, relief blooming cautiously, like something that might be taken away if acknowledged too loudly. The stranger didn't move. As the train drew closer, the air shifted. Wind rushed through the station, carrying sound and grit and the metallic smell of brakes. The bench vibrated beneath us, a shared trembling that blurred the boundary between our bodies even more. I stood up. The decision came suddenly, fully formed, like it had been waiting for permission. I didn't look at him as I rose. I didn't say anything. I simply stepped forward, creating space at last, my legs unsteady as blood rushed back into them. The absence of his warmth felt almost shocking. I stood near the edge of the platform, heart pounding, the roar of the arriving train filling my ears. Doors slid open. People spilled out, voices overlapping, footsteps chaotic. The bench behind me was swallowed by movement. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then, as I stepped toward the open doors, I felt it again. That sense of being too close. I turned my head slightly. He was standing now. Not right beside me. Not touching. but close enough, closer than necessary. The train doors chimed, impatient. I stepped inside. The doors slid shut. Through the glass, I saw him remain on the platform, still watching as the train pulled away. Or maybe he wasn't watching me at all. Maybe I just needed him to be. The station disappeared into darkness, and I stood among strangers, my reflection staring back at me from the window, wide-eyed, unsettled, carrying something unfinished. The space beside me on the train was empty. I didn't sit. I didn't sit for the rest of the ride. There were seats, empty ones even, a row near the door, another farther down the carriage. But my body refused the idea of settling again, as if stillness had become something risky. So I stood, one hand gripping the overhead rail, feet planted wider than usual to keep my balance as the train lurched forward. The motion was familiar, almost comforting. The sway, the low rattle beneath the floor, the muted conversations drifting around me like half-remembered dreams. No one stood too close. That should have been enough. But my awareness didn't release its grip so easily. It stayed taut, stretched thin across the space around me, measuring distances, registering movement. Every time someone shifted their weight or stepped past me, my muscles responded before my thoughts did. I watched the doors between carriages, the reflections in the glass, my own face, pale under the harsh interior lights, eyes a little too alert. I told myself it was over. The words felt rehearsed. It's done. You moved. You're safe. And yet, there was a residue to the moment, like a sound that continues to ring after the source has stopped. A low hum beneath everything else. At the next stop, more people boarded. The car filled in gradually, bodies arranging themselves according to unspoken rules. Who stands where, who avoids eye contact, who claims space without apology. I noticed all of it. I noticed how easily some people leaned into others, unbothered by proximity. How casually elbows brushed, shoulders bumped. How little meaning it seemed to carry for them. I wondered if I'd always been this aware, or if something had sharpened my attention, turned the volume up on sensations that had once blended into the background. When my stop came, I stepped off quickly, the platform cool beneath my feet. The train pulled away behind me with a rush of air, leaving the station suddenly quieter than before. I stood there longer than necessary, watching the dark tunnel swallow the last red lights. Only then did I realize my hands were shaking. Not violently, just enough to be noticeable. A faint tremor, like my body was still processing something my mind hadn't fully named. I tucked my hands into my pockets and started toward the exit. The walk home was uneventful. Streetlights cast familiar pools of yellow on the pavement. A cat darted across the road and vanished between parked cars. Somewhere, a radio played softly through an open window. Ordinary sounds, ordinary night. And yet, every time footsteps appeared behind me, my shoulders tightened. Every time someone passed too close on the sidewalk, my breath caught just slightly. I reached my building and let myself inside, the door clicking shut behind me with a finality that felt heavier than usual. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning solution and something stale underneath it. Safe, I told myself. I climbed the stairs, unlocked my door, stepped inside, and closed it carefully, listening to the lock engage. Only then did I lean back against the wood and exhale fully. The apartment greeted me the way it always did, quiet, dim, unchanged. I flicked on a lamp, its warm light pushing back the shadows. The familiar shapes of my furniture settled my nerves a little, like landmarks confirming I was where I was supposed to be. I set my bag down, kicked off my shoes. I noticed how deliberate my movements were, how controlled. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it slowly, feeling the coolness slide down my throat. My hand steadied. My breathing evened out. I tried to let the night go. Later, lying in bed, I replayed the moment again. Not the whole thing, just pieces. The bench, the closeness, the way I hadn't moved right away. I focused on that part more than anything else. Why hadn't I moved? The question hovered, persistent. I knew the practical answers. Politeness, uncertainty, the fear of being wrong, of misreading something harmless and reacting too strongly. But those answers felt incomplete. There was something else underneath them, something quieter. The truth was, part of me had been waiting for permission. Permission to trust my own discomfort. Permission to act without evidence. Permission to prioritize my internal alarm over social ease. That permission hadn't come from him. It had come from the moment I stood up. That realization sat with me, heavy and unresolved. Sleep came eventually, but it was shallow. I dreamed of spaces that narrowed without warning, of benches that grew smaller the longer I sat on them, of rooms where the air felt occupied even when I was alone. I woke before my alarm, heart racing, the dream already slipping away. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and forgiving. The world resumed its usual pace. Coffee brewed, emails waited, responsibilities lined up patiently, indifferent to the night before. I went about my day, but something had shifted. On the bus, I chose a seat near the window and kept my bag on the empty seat beside me. When someone approached, I moved it without apology, creating space with a quiet certainty that surprised me. At work, when a colleague leaned too close while speaking, I stepped back without explaining. The movement felt strange, almost rebellious. No one commented. That too surprised me. It made me wonder how many boundaries exist only because we don't test them. Throughout the day, the stranger returned to my thoughts uninvited. Not his face, not his features, just the feeling. That subtle, encroaching awareness of someone occupying more space than they needed. The way my body had recognized it instantly, long before my mind had caught up. I wondered how many times I'd ignored that signal before. How many small discomforts I'd swallowed because they were inconvenient, because they lacked drama, because they couldn't be easily explained. I wondered how many others did the same. That night, I found myself back at the station. Not the same one. A different route, different lights, different bench. I noticed the space beside me immediately. When someone sat down at a respectful distance, I felt my shoulders relax, the tension I hadn't realized I was holding finally easing. The contrast was startling. Nothing about this person was different. Not safer, not kinder, just farther away. That was all it took. The train arrived on time. I boarded, found a seat, and sat. As the doors closed and the station slipped away, I caught my reflection in the window again. This time, my eyes looked steadier, still thoughtful, still alert, but no longer waiting. The stranger from the other night faded gradually, like a sound receding into distance. He became less a person and more a moment, a reminder, perhaps, rather than a threat. And yet, sometimes, when I sit beside someone in a quiet place, I feel it again. That awareness, that internal question. Am I comfortable? The answer comes faster now. And I listen. Because the truth is, some moments don't end when you leave them behind. They follow you, not as fear, but as knowledge. And knowledge, once it settles in, changes the way you sit in the world. Sometimes the moments that feel the smallest are the ones that stay with you the longest. A glance, a step, a silence between words. The things we notice but don't act on. Tonight's story is one of those moments. It isn't about what happened. but about what we felt. When you leave your headphones, carry this with you quietly. Notice the spaces around you, the people beside you, and most of all, the boundaries you keep for yourself. Because some lessons don't arrive with a warning. They arrive softly, subtly, and linger longer than we expect. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing and joining me for the next quiet tale. Until then, keep your space, trust your instincts, and listen closely.